Hello again. Welcome back to the Canterlot archives. I take it you're here because you finished your last book, am I right? I'm glad to see you enjoyed it. I've been holding Volume 6 of the Condensed History of Equestria for you, since I knew you'd be coming back for it soon. It hasn't been easy, though. So many ponies are checking out historical texts lately. It seems there's been a great surge of interest in history. I wonder if it has anything to do with Princess Twilight's crowning. Well, in any case, I bet you're excited to get started on this volume. Let's not wait any longer, shall we? Equestria was in a poor state following Nightmare Moon's attempted conquest, and many communities were left in ruins. The High Pony Council was broken, made up of remnants of the herd of Astros, whom none were willing to follow after Luna's betrayal. Assistance was scattered and poorly organized, but a pony by the name of Guiding Light had succeeded in bringing her town together in that dark time. And when others saw what she had done, they came to her asking for guidance. Seeing the hopeless state of her fellow equestrians, Guiding Light gave everything she could to ease their suffering. Spearheading the recovery efforts, Guiding Light established a collective of ponies to travel between the various settlements and aid in rebuilding. It was a union made up of earth ponies, unicorns, and pegasi. Each team unit was designated to aid in a specific part of the work effort. Earth ponies repaired and restored the land. Unicorns would magically mend homes and cast protective wards, and the pegasi would rein in the weather to make it more manageable. Of course, rebuilding Equestria was not quite so pedestrian as this. Nightmare Moon's rampage had awakened a great number of monsters from their slumber, and villages suffered under attacks from raiding diamond dogs as well. Ponies couldn't even travel alone safely, as bandits and thieves lurked in wait along the roads. Guiding Light arranged for her relief ponies to be trained by former soldiers, instructing them in self-defense and tactical combat. Each unit was trained to maximize their talents as a whole, and they became a sort of relief army. They marched the lands providing aid and protection, bringing discipline, order, and a considerable amount of hope to ponies in desperate need of it. This would become the foundation for the EUP Guard later on. But while she was pleased with the restoration efforts, Guiding Light couldn't help but think of Equestria's absent monarch. And the longer she traveled, the more she saw how desperately Equestria needed its ruler. She became angry with Celestia for abandoning her people, seeing her as a princess in name only. But with so many ponies turning to her for leadership, Guiding Light realized she was in far over her head. Eventually, Guiding Light traveled to the Everfree Forest to find that it had once again become wild and dangerous. She ventured alone to the palace of the Royal Pony Sisters, intending to demand Celestia abdicate her rule and give her a very large piece of her mind. But when she confronted the princess, she was not met with the powerful alicorn she had expected. Princess Celestia was as broken as Equestria itself, overcome by her guilt and grief. Of all the ponies Guiding Light had seen and helped, Celestia was the most pitiful. Seeing the princess in such a heartbroken state, Guiding Light came to a different realization: that helping the princess was tantamount to helping Equestria. Healing the princess's broken heart would be the same as healing the land. And so Guiding Light swore herself to the princess, not as an aide or a protector, but as a friend. These are the events that are recounted to us from Guiding Light's own memoirs. It was Guiding Light who brought the princess back to her people, snapping Celestia out of her grief by reminding her of her love for her subjects and their dire need of her rule. She convinced the ponies of Equestria that Celestia needed them as much as they needed her. The relief army she had built became the protective pony platoons of the EUP to serve as Celestia's guard. And with Guiding Light's support, Celestia once again brought Equestria to an age of peace and prosperity. After the restoration was completed, the EUP held a celebration to mark what they called the First Celestial Year of Peace. It was held on the anniversary of Nightmare Moon's defeat. Guiding Light was by Celestia's side, as together they held the first ever Summer Sun celebration. Guiding Light would remain Celestia's confidant until the end of her days. But not many ponies realized the impact she had on not just the princess, but Equestria's future. During her time at Celestia's side, Guiding Light began a project that would take the entirety of her life to complete. She took it upon herself to oversee the reconstruction of King Alloy's castle, which had fallen into ruin before even Discord's rise. As the unifier of the warring unicorns, Alloy served as an example to Guiding Light, who wanted to bring his ideals of equality and justice back to the ponies of Equestria. And with Celestia's support, this reconstructed castle would become the new capital city of Equestria, and the foundation of the Equestria we know today. This bright new era, brought together by Guiding Light and Celestia, is known as the Canterlot Restoration. When Guiding Light finally passed, Celestia personally oversaw her friend's funeral. A monument was built to her in the royal gardens of Canterlot, which can be visited even today. And while Celestia was saddened by the loss of her friend, she never again fell into the despair she had known after losing her sister. She instead continued her steadfast guardianship and guidance of Equestria, becoming a wiser, stronger ruler. The second celestial era is considered to have begun with the sealing of Nightmare Moon, and its first century was concluded with the Canterlot Restoration. Following this, Equestria's spirit was revived, and Celestia encouraged her subjects to venture out as they had in the past. Having been so focused on their internal dilemmas for so long, they had fallen out of contact with those nations they'd held alliances with, and wanted to renew their friendships. A new age of exploration had begun that would serve as Equestria's catapult into the future. And among the notable names of this era was an unlikely pony who would become the most infamous explorer of them all, a Pegasus pony by the name of Margerine. When Equestria's rebuilding was complete, they once again took to the sea, reviving the designs of ancient spell ships used in the past. Equestria's enhancements in magic and technology made the ship stronger than ever before, and so many began voyages south and east. But there was one ship's captain with greater ambitions, and worked tirelessly to make his ship as strong as it could be. Margerine was the only explorer willing to attempt the dangerous voyage over Eternity's Crossing, which many ships had failed in the past. As a result, it took some time before he could convince a crew to follow him. And when he sailed away, many expected him to fail as the others had. But Margerine was possessed of an unusual stubborn streak and an uncanny understanding of weather systems. Margerine was the first pony to successfully navigate Eternity's Crossing and reach the shores of the 5 Kirin Kingdoms. Well, the first known pony, anyways. As Margerine would discover, the returning ship of the Kirin visitors and the ponies who accompanied them, the Mikomi, had in fact made it across, but their ship was so badly damaged that they could never hope to rebuild it. And so, the Equestrians were taken in, much as they had done for the Kirin, and their descendants lived on in the kingdoms. Because of them, the Kirin rulers were more than happy to accept Celestia's offer of friendship, and they sent back with Margerine, one of their own princes, as an ambassador, to return the bones of those ponies to their home soil at long last. Margerine was hailed as a hero when he returned to Equestria, but he didn't stay long enough to enjoy the accolades. No sooner had he come home before he was once again plotting his next course. It's said that while navigating Eternity's Crossing, Margerine glimpsed what appeared to be a city within the heart of the storm. And afterwards, he was forever driven to try and reach it. And while Margerine was sailing, there were other explorers traveling over land. They established first contact with the Percherons of Germany and the Boers of Tuscany. Of course, not all of these nations were welcoming, but there was never any want for open war. All nations were better off with the new trading routes established. Celestia wasted no time forming alliances with those countries discovered, but not all nations were open to the princess's negotiations. While forging her alliances, Celestia attempted to establish a solid peace with the nearby Saddle Arabia, whom Equestria had known strained relations with ever since the First War. Unfortunately, Celestia's appearance to the royals of Saddle Arabia was not welcomed. As had been discovered by enduring patience in centuries past, the Saddle Arabians had at one point been the slaves of the Alicorn kingdom. Now that Equestria was being openly ruled by an Alicorn, Saddle Arabia had taken a hostile stance towards their neighbors and refused Equestria entry of any sort. Saddle Arabia had become a powerful country in their own right, so if another war sparked with Equestria, the allies of both nations were bound to be dragged in. This was an outcome neither country desired, but the Saddle Arabians refused to budge on their stance and kept their borders closed. It seemed that peace with Saddle Arabia would never happen so long as Celestia ruled. Because of their sad history, the Arabians were motivated by fear and distrust, and were unwilling to even approach the table of discussion. Celestia had made it known she preferred a peaceful resolution, and in the past had shown herself more than willing to sacrifice herself for the sake of others. But Celestia's preferred choice of tactic would not work on an opponent unwilling to even speak with her. Instead, the princess took an aggressive stance towards Saddle Arabia, openly challenging the Sultan to single combat to resolve their issues. If he refused, he would appear as a coward, and his allies would abandon him. The Sultan had no choice but to accept Celestia's challenge, and the two of them finally came face to face. History marks the Sultan as the victor of that battle, but Celestia's intention had been to speak with him, not fight him. Nor did she simply surrender the fight. Had she thrown the battle, the Sultan would have been insulted, leaving no hope of resolution. Instead, she agreed to the Sultan's demands of a battle without magic, and fought him with honor to the very best of her ability. This earned the Sultan's respect, and when the battle concluded, it was the Sultan himself who proposed they remain and discuss the futures of their countries together. Having faced Celestia, the Sultan was able to see that the princess was not the same as the Alicorns that had enslaved his people long ago. He expressed his despair to her and his desire to free his people from their ancient fears. To do this, Celestia proposed that the two of them enter the Alicorn sanctuary buried in the desert, so that the Sultan could put an end to that fear with his own two hooves. The Sultan agreed, and with Celestia's magic, the seal on the ancient temple was lifted, letting them finally discover what lay within. As has since been learned, the Alicorns had used the lands of Saddle Arabia for their experiments, and the inhabitants were used as a labor force. The Alicorn sanctuary documented this, but it also recounted the remorse of those Alicorns in charge of the magical experiments. They had devastated a once beautiful land and brought great suffering to a people they had cruelly assumed to be inferior. And so the Alicorns had spent their remaining days fashioning a spell to undo all the damage they had wrought, restoring the desert to the lush paradise it had once been. But this spell of restoration had never been activated, and was left behind when the cataclysm struck, when all other remnants of the Alicorn kingdom had vanished. It was a final apology to the horses of Saddle Arabia, with a message stating their hope that one day they would be able to use it. This revelation came as quite a shock to the Arabian Sultan. It changed the history of his people and all their past assumptions. What the Alicorns had left them was a great gift. But the irony was that it was far too late for the gift to work. The horses of Saddle Arabia had learned to survive in the harsh desert over countless centuries, adapting themselves to the arid region and thriving in a place where no life should be able to. While the restoration spell might have turned the desert into a paradise, his people would again have to learn to survive in an all-new environment. Their struggle over the long centuries would become meaningless. And so, at the request of the Sultan, Princess Celestia once again sealed the Alicorn sanctuary. Only, this time, with an exception. Knowing the great power contained within the sanctuary, the Sultan knew that others would attempt to take and misuse its power. And so, the Sultan dedicated his royal line to the protection of the sanctuary and its great magic. And with this decision also came the peace Celestia had been hoping for. Saddle Arabia and Equestria entered into an alliance, and have since that day been our nation's closest friends. This concludes Volume 6. It might be a condensed version, but you can start to see what these events are building to. And the next volume is the very last in the series. But that's for next time. You know, we've had so many ponies asking about history lately that the head librarian is considering starting a class of sorts to teach ponies who are interested. Let me know how you enjoyed Volume 6, and I'll see you at the archives next month. Here we are at the end of episode 6. Only one more episode to go for the condensed history of Equestria. And have I got plans? Following that, we'll have our subscriber special Q&A, where we'll answer questions from the fans. If you haven't done so yet, use the link in the description to reach the Ask Box of our Tumblr. Specify if the question is for me or for SkyShadow, and we'll do our best to get them all answered. Following our Q&A, we'll be reopening the history polls and launching our History of the Zebras. So keep your eyes peeled, equestrian history buffs. Your Overmare is out!